Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by Exploring Dora. Follow Dora around the world, learning JavaScript. Episode 322, Building React Native Libraries with Builder Bob.
Welcome back to React Native Radio. I'm Robin. Jamin is out today, so I'm your lovely host, and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Mazen.
Hello.
We also have a guest with us today, Burak Güner, who will introduce himself.
Hello. So my name is Burak. I'm working at ColdStack as a senior software developer. I maintain a library called React Native Builder Bob and another one called Create React Native Library, which is in the same repo.
That's awesome. We are so excited to have you here today. Like you mentioned, we are talking about React Native Builder Bob, but also Create React Native Library, which Burak helps maintain. But before we get into that topic, I have to mention our lovely sponsor, Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US. We're a team of 30 senior plus level React Native developers and support staff, and have been doing this for nearly a decade. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up at infinite.red/radio. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. Let's get into it. So, Create React Native Library and React Native Builder Bob. I'm guessing a lot of our listeners are app developers and not necessarily library authors. So give us your elevator pitch for Create React Native Library and React Native Builder Bob. What are they? Why do you use them?
Okay, so if you're an app developer, good for you because you don't have to deal with a lot of stuff that we have to.
So you're saying that was a good life choice.
Yeah, definitely. So let's start talking about the Builder Bob stuff first. So it's 2025. You have JavaScript, a interpreted language, and you have to transpile it down to more JavaScript, which is the same interpreted language. But at least you got Bob that you can use to help with building you the library. So if you're not familiar with building your JavaScript code, you kind of have to ship a common JS bindings. You have to ship ES modules and some TypeScript declarations for everything to work properly. And Bob handles that for you by simplifying the config and the build process. Bob does not handle publishing for you. It just handles the building. Hence
the name Builder Bob, which, by the way, do you know if it was actually named after Bob the Builder?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
I feel like you've been itching to ask that question, I think, Robin.
I have, because that's what everyone thinks. And I love it that was actually.
And Google doesn't help. Every time you type Builder Bob, Bob the Builder comes up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You have to say React Native Builder Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
That's funny. I love it. I take it you did not get the licensing rights to actually use the image of Bob the Builder.
Yeah, let's not mention this a lot.
That would be epic if you could. Anyway.
Exactly.
So that's Builder Bob.
So Builder Bob repo is a monorepo. For those who are not familiar with what a monorepo is, it's basically a single Git repo which has multiple packages that we maintain. The other package we maintain is called Create React Native Library, and it creates React Native libraries for you. Suggested by the name.
Makes sense.
It does.
Very good name.
Yeah. Creating React Native libraries from scratch is kind of hard. It's actually like creating a React Native app from scratch. You would never create any folder called npm in it to generate an empty package.json file and then fill the name, add some dependencies. No, you would probably use something like Expo. I think it was Create Expo app, or the community CLI one to generate the application. And the Create React Native library helps you just do the same thing with a library instead of an app. And there are plenty of options that you can choose from. You can create a JavaScript only library for React Native applications. Also, you can ship them to web as well. But they're going to be React Native only. They're not JavaScript only. They're not going to have any native code at all. But at the same time, like the most power comes with the React Native libraries comes from the native code itself. So you can actually use the platform APIs like the camera API, I don't know, something like the file system. You are able to use them through some native code, and Create React Native library helps you create a native library as well. You can create a C++ library, you can create a Objective-C plus Kotlin library, and we are also bringing support for Nitro modules. So soon you will be
nice.
so soon you will be able to create a Nitro module library with Create React Native library.
Okay, so it is new architecture compatible also, and that's the question everybody and all our listeners probably are looking for once they look for this kind of stuff.
I mean, with 76, it's on by default, so right. It's getting increasingly necessary.
So the moment you said new architecture, it immediately hurt me.
You have some pain?
We do.
Yeah.
So I think like the biggest problem with new architecture was on library developers' shoulders because we had to figure out a lot of stuff. We even had some like backward compatible new architecture template at some point that support both architectures, which was a nightmare to maintain.
Thank you for doing all that work, because that's the hard part for people, I guess pre-76 when, it was on by default. I think there's the whole pain of, do I even bother with new architecture because I have to be backwards compatible? Do I have to be forwards compatible? I was talking to a client the other day and they were like, hey, we want to build a NPM package. I won't go into the details of it, but they're like, okay, we want to be backwards compatible and new architecture compatible. Then they're like, well, we also want to make sure we are Expo, old architecture, new architecture compatible. And they're like, okay, and we don't have that much time, so put this in the back burner. So it's a lot. Thank you for kind of embarking
classic
on that,
client.
right?
Yeah.
Do all this stuff, and you don't have any time to do it.
What is the difference between the two? Like, when would I reach for Builder Bob versus when would I reach for Create React Native Library?
Create React Native library actually also comes with Bob. So whenever you create a new library, it comes with Bob pre-installed. When you build the library, Bob kicks in and does the build process and then publishes it. It does not do the publishing. Some other tool called Release It does the publishing for us. Okay.
Theoretically use Bob on your existing library that was not created with Create React Native Library.
Yeah.
But if you're using Create React Native Library, you're automatically using Builder Bob. Gotcha.
Exactly. And Bob comes with an init command that you can use to add Bob to any project.
Gotcha.
Okay. So if I have a project, I'm working on my client project and we want to spin off this native code that we've built into a package, I would reach for Bob to kind of get me going. Okay. So if my client's listening, the time frame just dropped a little bit. So there we go.
Just don't tell them to listen. Just say it's going to take a year.
Yeah.
Just kidding. We would never do that. Like I said, I think our audience is probably primarily app developers. Can you just like walk them through, maybe like an explain like I'm 5 about like what like library authors are concerned with versus app developers? Like when you're building a library, what are the components of the library that would be different from like what you're concerned with as an app developer? Okay,
so let's split this into two scenarios. First of all, let's say you only have some JavaScript code that you want to bundle and just send to a React Native app. What you would do is you would structure your code in a way that it's easy to bundle and send. Like you would just pass it to Bob and Bob would do all the like bundling and just ship it. You don't need to have any like build.gradle files, any pod spec files, because those are the crazy stuff. And I'm going to be coming to them in just a second. But like with JavaScript libraries, it's pretty simple in general. There is one thing that you have to pay attention to, and it's that if you are including any native dependencies like React Native Reanimated, gesture handler, something like that, you shouldn't put that into the dependencies section of your libraries package.json, because that way the React Native cannot auto-link them. And as a result, those are not going to be included in the final application. So you should always put them to pure dependencies and dev dependencies.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was such a big difference. And I was always like, I always wondered why libraries would do pure dependencies versus just like making it a regular
Yeah.
dependency. But
That always
makes
breaks.
sense.
That always breaks my brain. The peer dev, and I know it's straightforward, but it's weird because I've tried it sometimes to put a peer dependency in a package, and only for it not to trickle down correctly, and then the package itself doesn't really know it because it's like, hey, I don't have it. My peer should have it. Now what? Yeah. So that's helpful context.
And the worst part is when you have a peer dependency and the user doesn't have it, it's just a warning that's easy to miss.
Right. It's so easy to miss.
Exactly.
Well, and like, I swear I've had projects where there's like a list of like 5 or 6 peer dependency warnings, but like the app still works just fine. And so you're like, what? Why do you have this as a peer dependency if you're working by? It's probably like a dependency of a dependency that has a.
I would say like your best bet is to put that, like if you are depending on Reanimated, just put that onto your README and people can just like install everything with just one command.
Yeah. I feel like you don't see libraries very often spell that out in their documentation. Like, hey, these are our peer dependencies. You have to install these before you can install it.
Yeah.
Luckily for things like gesture handler and Reanimated and stuff, most React Native projects already have them.
Exactly.
And so it's not an issue. But
And if you'd like to talk about native dependencies, then it's a whole different story because now you have to think about React Native auto-linking your package. So it has to be structured in a certain way. The best way to test if your auto-linking works properly is to call a command called add React Native community/CLI config, which is going to be listing you a list of packages that are auto-linked with like the native platform.
interesting.
But if you're wondering how auto-linking works, I guess you can go to the docs or just read the source code. That's what I do oftentimes.
That was going to be my next question because I was like, auto-linking, honestly, I mean, I remembered the days when we had to do manual linking, and that was
Fun.
And then auto-linking was introduced in what, 60?
60, yeah, it should
React
be.
Native 60, something like that.
Something around there, yeah.
And then ever since then, it's like, I don't even think about it. And I have no idea what it's doing. It just seems to work magically. And so, it's not one of my primary day-to-day concerns. But I imagine as a library author, you have to understand it pretty well. Would you say you learned everything you know about auto-linking just from like reading the docs and looking at other packages? Or is there a good resource out there to learn more?
So I learned it from Create React Native Library itself when I joined as a contributor and just seen the whole code. But I had to dive deep into the source code when I wanted to add support for C++ only dependencies. Previously, if you had a C++ only dependency, like a C++ only dependency is a dependency without any Kotlin, Swift, Objective-C code. It's pure C++ and maybe some JavaScript. And they've added a feature to auto-link them via Turbo modules. And the support was not there yet. So I had to go into the CLI and just debug how it works.
Gotcha. I mean, that's how I think a lot of us learn a lot of things. It's like something's broken and you got to figure out how to fix it. And then you know more when you're done. I definitely have had a few days like that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to keep talking about the native dependencies, you also have to have a build.gradle file for Android libraries, which has to have some certain stuff that are accumulated throughout the years with React Native. I think prior to like React Native 73 or 74, you didn't have namespace support in Android libraries. So like as a result, you have to have like add this namespace support if this library has it. Don't add it if it doesn't. Like we have a lot of conditions like this just to make your library compatible with a lot of versions of React Native. So we got much more, especially with React Native's new architecture. We also look for like if the new architecture is enabled, also add these files, like add codegen specs, add like some, maybe include some C++ stuff. So all those you have to figure out if you are not using Create React Native library. Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, I was gonna. So like, I have a question here just about exactly that. Like, what is the experience of creating a library like without these tools? What specifically is Create React Native Library and Builder Bob? What pain points are they removing?
Okay, so if you want to create a library from scratch, you can just go visit React Native docs. They have step-by-step explanation of what you need to add, what you need to like have in the build.gradle file, what you need to do in order to enable the codegen config and those kind of stuff. What Create React Native Library does for you is we have some predefined templates, right? Like we have a Swift template, we have a Kotlin one, we have all those. And when you call the Create React Native Library command, we ask you what kind of library you want to develop. Like based on those answers, we just fetch the templates and just create the library for you. Like we just render the templates into an actual project that you can use. And we also have to generate an example app for you, which is something interesting because we actually call the community CLI to initialize a new app because we don't want to maintain a copy of the app template in the Bob repo.
Interesting. Okay, so it actually invokes the CLI, so you're not managing like a forever outdated template example app. Does it? I mean, like, I bet it adds time to the.
That's why you're waiting when you want it.
To the initialization.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the most amount of time you have to wait.
Yeah.
But having an example app is very important, I think. Not only probably for you all to test as you're, fixing it and stuff like that, but also for me as the library maintainer or even just app developer that's looking to build a pack, split out my native code into a package. It's always good to have that example app there to help you test, but at the same time to help the consumer. So if I'm using a library, sometimes some packages out there don't have an example app, and it's kind of hard to see it and visualize it, and it's hard, right? I see you laughing, Burak, because some don't, right? And those are the ones that are harder to test things out and figure out what's happening. And I think
and heaven forbid you have to like open a PR for a library you're using because something's broken, and all of a sudden you're assuming the role of library contributor, maintainer, author, and having as much setup in there to make that easy for contributors as possible is really helpful.
I think your best option if you don't have any example app and having an example app does not mean that your app, like your library, is 100% ready. You still have to test your library against a real app, actual app. And I can actually shout out a tool that does that, that simplify that process. It's called Yalc, YALC. And what it does is it publishes your library for you like it does for NPM, but it does that locally. So you can fetch that from the file system again in like some other directory and just use that as like a regular dependency in any other app.
Interesting. That's really cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. We'll link that in the show notes for anybody who's curious.
Definitely. And we use this to test Bob because Bob itself is a CLI tool that should be able to use with actual libraries.
That's really good to know about. I find that anytime I've been in a position of having to like write a library, testing it and like actually consuming it like in an app while I'm developing it is always one of the hardest parts, because I'm actively developing on it and I want to see like the changes that I'm making to see if they work, if they're reflected instantly, which is really hard to do when you need to like have an app that's consuming it. So what kind of setup do you have for that? Is that what the example app is for?
Yeah. So for regular React Native development, what you do is I'm mostly going to focus on having some native code, because having some JS code, like JS only library generated with CRNL is pretty easy because it's just like app code. You can have some hot reloading going on. But when it comes to a native app, it's not, because you have to compile it. You have to build the app to see your changes.
Yeah.
So what we do is with the example app, you are given an Android and iOS project. What you should do is you go open your like Android Studio or Xcode using that example app, and that example app will have your library linked, and you just edit the code. The changes to your code will be reflected to your actual library. And we actually had some issues, like some people had some problems because it's not clear what you should do immediately. Actually, we have all these in the contributing.md file that's your individual library, but it's still like a lengthy process that you have to do. But like that's the only way to do it right now. So you open that example app and then like edit the example app to be able to change your library's code.
Gotcha.
It's a tedious process, right? Because we're talking about cross-platform, multi-platform development here, right? So you do need all these tools to be able to do it. native developers are always like, well, all I need is Xcode or Android Studio and I'm done, but we're talking about that extra step, adding in all these extra platforms. So you do need all this stuff. So the ability to go into, we always say it, right? The reason why React Native is good is because of the native developers that come in and give us the native expertise. And, React Native wouldn't be what it is without React and without native. So stuff like these help us kind of drop down to the native layer and give that great experience. And if React Native doesn't have it, the ability to go down to native is always a +1.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the hardest part is editing the native code itself, because it's just code at the end of the day. It's not that different than JavaScript. I think the hardest part is like dealing with Gradle, build.gradle file you have, which is using a language called Groovy, if you're not familiar. And then we have some Ruby with the Cocoa plot.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Ruby's
love
fine.
Ruby. So we have a pod spec file, which is read by something called Cocoa pods, which I don't think that it has great docs. Like, I think it has decent docs, but the problem is with Xcode. You have to know a lot of you have to know this header compile, like header include path, like all those stuff you have to know to create a decent library. Like, I see that a common use case for creating a new library is wrapping a third-party SDK from your client, a native one especially, because the clients don't just want the JS ones to be like brought in React Native, because JS libraries are limited in general. When you have native code, you can also access the platform APIs. So they generally want you to wrap a native library, and now you have to deal with an AAR file, some dependency from Maven, maybe like some XC framework, like a CocoaPods pop. And I think that's the hardest stuff, like when dealing with creating a new native library.
I kind of want to ask you, like, higher level, pre the birth of Bob and that's funny. Sorry. Pre the birth of Bob and create React Native library. Tell us the story. Like, how did these libraries come to be? What was the inspiration?
Was there a specific problem, or like someone was experiencing some pain, like trying to build a library, and they're like, screw it. I need to build something to fix this. Was there like a story for how the inception of them?
Exactly. So Satya, Satya, he's maintaining React Navigation. And I talked to him, and he told me that he had problems building his libraries. As a result, Bob became a thing.
Was born.
That's like so classic for developers. They're like, this is annoying and hard, and I'm lazy, so I'm going to do a bunch more work to build something to make it less annoying.
Yeah.
But it's so nice because we end up with all these tools to help everyone. But like, it's so funny.
And what's interesting is people always complain about the amount of stuff that we have with a library generated with Create React Native Library, because we have to be able to generate some change logs. We have to be able to like build our library and publish. So we have to have a lot of tools. Like, we have to install release it for you, left hook for you, and not everyone is a big fan of that, especially like advanced users are not big fans. But at the end of the day, so like Satya always tells me that, I need this to be there because I want my library to be like publishable.
So here, it's driven by it's driven by Satya, who's like, this is what I need, so this is what's going in. But it's like, I trust him and his needs. So if he gives his stamp of approval for something, then like I'm like, okay, that's a good thing to use. But we have that issue with our we have our boilerplate Ignite, and there's always people who complain about, well, why is this in there? Why is this in there? I was like, at the end of the day, you have to put something out there that's useful to you and you think is good, and not everyone is gonna love it or think everything's useful, and that's okay.
Something just came to my mind. Are there any other alternatives? Because every time I'm looking to kind of do something like this, regardless of, I know Nitro modules, you mentioned that's coming in the future, but that's something new. But prior to all this stuff, is there an alternative to React Native, Create React Native Library or Bob?
So from what I know, I think I saw Bob so we have some tools listed in Bob's README. We can take a look at there, but they're not as popular as Bob. And
Okay. Fair enough. That's what I anticipated.
This is the one that I hear about the most, and that seems to be the most.
Maybe like the Expo modules stuff.
Right. What's the Expo one?
Probably like Expo Create Library.
Create
module
Expo module.
Yeah. Which is useful, and it's in the Expo ecosystem, but you're not always trying to target the Expo ecosystem. So
yeah, we definitely love Expo modules, but we just don't like have support for it. We are supporting Turbo modules, the old module system, which is native modules, and Nitro modules are going to be supported soon.
Very cool. So we're almost out of time, but for one last thing, I have to ask, what is in the future for Create React Native Library and Builder Bob? Is there any new features planned, new releases planned, or are you mostly just kind of like keeping up with React Native?
So you just asked a wonderful question, because we are planning something that's going to be pretty big, I guess. So you know how the app upgrade helper works with React Native apps?
Yeah.
Yeah. You tell that you are using this version of React Native. You wish to upgrade to this other newer version of.
I love that too. It's such a good tool.
Imagine that for libraries.
Yeah. Oh, I like what I hear. That would be helpful.
If you've recently created a new library with CRNL, you might notice in the package.json you have this create React Native library field with a version of the tool itself. So we start tracking them, and we're going to be building that from scratch. This was actually an idea from the Meta folks. So they wanted to talk us about some like having Bob as the like golden template for library development.
Wow.
That's great.
That's a big deal. You're going to make it on the docs?
It's already in the docs, but not in a golden way.
The blessed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like how Expo frameworks and Expo was the blessed way. Now this gets the blessing. That's awesome.
Yeah. So will it work this similar to how the upgrade helper works? Like you just like select your version of Create React Native Library and then the one you're upgrading to, and it'll tell you.
I think we can just even fork the tool and just tweak it.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And other than that, like maintenance is always something to do because
React Native, that pesky keeps releasing new versions. We all feel that pain. You're like, I feel like I just did this and now I have to do it again.
So the thing is, each time they release a new minor, Bob definitely breaks and I have to fix it.
Even minor versions,
like,
huh?
The minors are the breaking ones because it's zero based, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's every version of React Native is a minor version.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Or you have the patch versions. At least the patch don't break.
Which are minor.
Yeah, the tool.
Yeah.
We could say the patch is the minor version.
Okay.
That's fine.
I know. They've basically just like reinvented Semver and they're like, actually,
it's zero based.
This is how we're doing it. Yeah, it's zero based. Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Really, really lovely to talk to you. We'll make sure we link everything that we talked about in the show notes. And to our listeners, keep an eye out for the future goodies that are coming out with Create React Native Library and Builder Bob. Yeah, I will leave everyone with a joke. Okay, so little known fact. We are actually born with 4 kidneys. But when we grow up, 2 of them become adult knees.
No.
Kidneys, adult knees. I thought it was funny.
That is funny.
That's funny.
Do that.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamin Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.